Yeah, I think our young people are calling us to a more authentic way of being church. They gravitate towards that relationship, right? That's the foot in the door, and that's what grounds all of us, really. And I think they want to see a community that's honest with itself, that's not afraid to speak about its flaws, that's not afraid to show some of its scars, to admit its imperfections.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side.
Hey everybody, welcome to Talks with Tatum. This is Side by Side Podcast, and I'm really happy that you're here with us today. Today I've got a good friend and someone I've admired in ministry and the way that he goes about things. But I got John here with me today, and I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Thank you for inviting me. It's always good to hang out with you and
Of course.
talk about life and ministry together, Michael.
Yeah.
Grateful for it.
And so I got a story. The very first time that I encountered you, you probably don't even remember this.
I don't know.
But the person that was formerly here over youth left, as happens in churches, and that's a really, really vulnerable place, especially for people that have been in the youth group, for people that have had interactions and relationships in those places.
Sure.
And there's always like this anxious anticipation of how those shoes get filled.
Yeah.
And in churches, there really tends to be this energy, a lot of times, especially when somebody's really loved by a community, that they're like, oh, no one will ever fill these shoes or whatever,
Yeah.
or they're expecting the exact same thing to step in. And so there's always like this cautious anticipation of whoever's going to step in that place. And so I heard about the position opening, and I heard about them hiring you and the way that they split things. And I watched the service, and you were doing some piece of the service. I don't know if it was a pastoral prayer or you were doing like an offering statement. It was my very first interaction with you, and I was like, who's this?
Okay.
Who's this guy? And I was moved by your spirit, by the humility that you stepped into that moment with, and your presence in a worship sense. And none of those things are a given.
Yeah.
We think about pastors, and we think about people that work in these ministry roles, and we think about it being all of these different hats to wear.
Yeah.
And people being excellent at every single different facet.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's not the case. And so you often have people that are, really gifted in a personal sense, or really gifted in a management sense, or really gifted in a preaching sense. Mm-hmm. But the idea of people being excellent in all of those different facets is rare. So for you to step in and immediately be this humble presence, that spirit-filled, that's absolutely gifted in that realm, and also just the way you communicate, I was like, there's no worries here.
Oh, I'm glad. Grateful for that. That's such a great story, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you. It means a lot. We started doing worship here in the middle of COVID. That was my first experience of worship at Broadway, and the first time I was invited to give something like that was probably in the emptiness of our sanctuary with the cameras running, and later to be edited together. And so there was kind of a humility I think all of us were feeling in that season, like we're stepping into something we're not quite sure of, but that's how we're invited to live all the time, and how we're invited to do ministry all the time. So it felt comforting to know that all of us were in that space together, and I was able to start in that space, in a new space, kind of a new experience with others who are kind of walking the same journey at the same time. So, yeah.
And it's just funny that those kind of moments, especially in the vulnerability of the chaos of everything and things being kind of flipped on their head of the way that you do worship, and even ultimately from being able to be in person and then you're thrust in a gym environment and everything is different, and it's very vulnerable, and your ability to communicate really shines through in that realm. So I was very impressed and just moved that you're able to step in that place and bring your spirit.
Thanks. Well, you got me thinking about the first time I encountered Michael Tatum then. I would have seen you in worship. I know I had heard you sing in church. We'd been visiting here in 2018, 2019-ish, and would have encountered you there. But in my role here at Broadway, we had one of our first youth nights, and we knew that music was going to be a piece of that, and music is not a gift of mine. And so as I discovered, like, who can we get? They said, well, Michael Tatum does that. He was the youth guy here at Broadway for a while, and he's really gifted. And then I remembered seeing you there and bringing you in for that first youth night, and just sitting in the circle and hearing you sing your song and draw out the stories from the kids and share your own stories. I was just like, every good youth program needs someone who knows how to sing and storytell and work a guitar in a way that invites young people into their own stories. And I was like, we're going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. So right back at you, Michael.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Everybody, has somebody that can maybe hold a tune, or in my case, probably can't hold a tune, but it works in those environments. What ultimately kind of pulled you towards ministry? Because obviously with a person of your skill set and your talents, there's a wide variety of ways that you can go.
Yeah.
But the civil servant route of humble servanthood, how do you get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of been a journey unfolding over a long time. I'd always had kind of an interest in religious things and spirit things. I was brought up in the Catholic faith, and going to church and going to what we called Wednesday night CCD classes with a family that was really involved in our church. That was a big part of the rhythm of my upbringing, and kind of came of age, went to university and took an interest in philosophy and comparative religious studies. I've always kind of had this seeker spirit, and was drawn to the questions, and was drawn to places in life that felt really meaningful and vulnerable and important.
Yeah.
And it seemed like faith communities, were always in those areas. I've always had a part of me that wants to teach too. I knew teaching at some point would be a part of whatever it is that I do. So I eventually went on to study philosophy and religion, and went on to get a degree in theology. And during that time, I was discerning, like, how is this going to manifest in my life? Once I get beyond this program, what's going to happen next? I'm kind of reaching a decision point here, right? I thought maybe PhD academic route might be a viable option. I love learning about this. I want to teach. I thought maybe there could be something I could do at a high school level. At that time, I was getting my degree from a Catholic university in Chicago, and thought I could teach or lead a campus ministry program. That appealed to me. I thought about nonprofit work. All of my interest in faith developed alongside my own kind of social consciousness, and kind of growing awareness of the issues in our world. And I knew that whatever I would do with my life had to intersect in some way with making the world a better place. Or I thought, maybe something else would emerge from all of that. I was hanging out with some people in a religious order, thinking maybe a life of poverty and charity and mercy might be the way to go. I eventually started dating this young woman who held some promise too, and I thought, well, maybe that'll turn into something. And we just kind of walked through that time. And eventually the Spirit would lead me more in the direction of teaching and ministry and service and family. And that all kind of started to take focus and line up for me. So I've always loved working with young people. I've always loved education and teaching, and I've always loved faith and seeking and spiritual questions. And all of the work that I've done in ministry, in different ministry settings, has held those three things in some way. And that's a big part of what I do now. So
yeah,
that's great.
That's awesome. So obviously over time, carrying the faith component, the teaching component, but also the young people component, how has that continued to evolve for you? Because, at one point, you were butting up against these young people that you were working with, and then now, every single year you get a little bit further, the gap gets a little bit further. How does that continue to thrive and live in you?
That's a good question. I remember back in my early days of teaching, I don't know, there was an energy and a boldness and a closeness and a proximity I had to my kids that I just loved. And I didn't have kids of my own at that time, so you can really give yourself over to the work or the place that you're at, to the relationships. You can you can give those kids everything. I loved direct ministry with them and for them, with their families. We did all kinds of things in the classroom and beyond the classroom. But I'd say as my own family needs ebbed and flowed and shifted some, so did my ministry. I spent 5 years working at a more administrative level, coordinating youth programs, religious education programs in and across central and northern Missouri. And that was a few layers removed from closer proximity to the kids, right? Yeah. It was more administrative. It was more working with the leaders who were working with the kids, equipping them and supporting them in the work that we all did. And that was really meaningful work, stretched me in a lot of different ways that didn't when I was more directly involved with kids. I learned new skill sets in that environment. I learned new ways to lead and to work as part of a team on bigger level projects. That helped shape me. But eventually, that love to be more directly involved with people in closer proximity to their lives, especially young people, pulled stronger. And when things in my life started to shift again, both personally and spiritually, God sort of lined some things up for me here at Broadway. And it was just amazing how the Spirit sort of moved pieces in my life, in the life of the community here, the needs and the interests that kind of brought us together in a way that was exciting and organic and definitely Spirit-led.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think when I think of like really successful youth programs, when I think of really successful people that have that intersection with young people, it's not so much this mindset of having been in the trenches for all of this time. Mm-hmm. The people that are really successful are people that have had moments and expansion into management, into leadership at a higher level, and they're able to implement all of these different pieces. And so that time spent at that higher level and just developing these tools and these resources and understanding how to apply that stuff, it just serves to make you even better.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about ministry is it requires a lot of creativity and a lot of different skill sets at any moment in time. So on any given day, I might have to hang out with middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, or hang out with high schoolers, and then later that night I've got something going on for parents, and then the next day I've got this meeting. There's a board meeting here at church where we're talking about kind of the administrative and nitty-gritty leadership stuff that makes faith communities work. And you got to be able to ebb and flow between all of those things. And I really love that about this work. Keeps me on my toes.
Understated skill set.
Yeah.
Right? We're preparing young people to live lives of ministry, and the image that we present is this very beautiful image of like, you get to engage in worship, and it gets to look like this, and you get to preach and teach, and maybe you get to sing, and you get to lead in this capacity, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful package to put in. You get to have these great youth events and all these things, but all of the things that come along with that and all of the shifts. Terry always talks about getting hijacked for Jesus. The idea
true.
that as stepping from one service to another or one event to another, you're going to get hijacked in the hallway, and you're going to have to immediately shift from that worship mindset or leadership mindset to just being present with somebody in a pastoral care kind of way. And that may happen from a young child all the way to a person that's entering the last stages of their life at any given moment. And I mean, how do you carry that constant need to be able to shift? I mean, that's pressure. How do you carry that pressure and that kind of weight on your shoulders to be like constantly agile?
That's a challenge for me. I kind of get in one frame of mind for one thing, and then suddenly that hijacked for Jesus moment comes, and you gotta shift, right? That's challenging for me. It's important for me to carve out certain spaces of my week where I know I can just do this particular thing on this particular day. That's helpful. Or I know that if I can get this done early on, I'm going to be more flexible later on in the week when these things have to happen. I think ultimately it's just being able to take a deep breath and go with what the Spirit needs you to do at any given moment in time. Try to stay true to your own agenda as you are able. But sometimes the work that you're not able to get done on the to-do list because you were caring for other things, you got to find some time beyond, whether it's office hours or once the kids are asleep or in an early morning to get up and do that work and get it done.
Yeah. Do you? I mean, it's certainly not a 9-to-5 job. We know this. But did you find that some of the pandemic pieces of being able to have some of that time to maybe work from home or have the church kind of closed down, or you can have those spaces to really hyper focus? Did you find that helped create that space for you to be in that creative mode, or not have to be the agile cat jumping from thing to thing and really dive in? I mean, did you find that to be the case? Yeah,
in a way. It did open up more unstructured space where you could focus on the project at hand in a way that being a part of the building or the ebb and flow of a community kind of gets in the way of sometimes. But the pandemic presented a whole nother litany of problems that had to be solved. And I remember in the midst of all of that, so much spirit and energy and mental bandwidth going into solving these new problems that I couldn't get to writing that thing, or I didn't get to organizing or making those phone calls because, boy, we had to spend 2 hours talking about masking policy or putting tape on the ground or whatever the weird thing was we were doing in those days. So in a way, it kind of counterbalanced itself out.
I mean, it's interesting, coming out of that environment where, from the outside perspective, it's like, oh, everything is easy, there's this abundance of time, but really everything is hyper coordinated in order to make anything happen. And the so-called freedom of it was really constricting in a lot of ways because it's constantly having to analyze and figure out and put out fires everywhere. Coming out of that environment, we want to jump headfirst into everything, into every ministry, into touching people as much as possible, which is great. But, I hear from ministers, that space that you got to have where you weren't getting hijacked Where you weren't having, you didn't have to have your phone on loud. You didn't have to have the doors to the church unlocked. You might have gotten to sit at home and really focus on that sermon that you were writing, or planning that curriculum that you needed to plan, or even just your own personal study that you needed to, that it was great space. And there's kind of this expectation of all those that work in ministry of constant availability. And people want to drive by the church and they want to be able to see the minister's car in the parking lot, and they want to be able to just stop in and just casually chat at any given point. And it really doesn't sometimes, that accessibility is good, but it doesn't create the space necessary that we all need sometimes.
That's true. I think a lot of us came out of the pandemic with a new sense of boundary. After focusing on boundaries and distances for several years, boundaries in some different ways: spiritual boundaries, personal boundaries, boundaries around work and profession and family. And I think in a lot of ways that's a healthy thing. We kind of had to readjust and reevaluate our boundaries as we leaned back into all of those things post-quarantine. But I think I hear from people all the time just a heightened sense of, are you finding time to take care of yourself? You don't have to do this thing if you need to go home and be with your kids, or just real gratitude if I am at an evening thing or a weekend thing. Thank you. Make sure you thank your family for sharing you with that. So I think there's a bigger awareness on people's hearts these days around boundaries, and recognizing that people in ministry too are better servants if we've got some space around the other areas of our lives that need to take priority sometimes. So
it's crazy. I worked here for 5 years, and I would be here for the middle of the night, early in the morning, the whole thing. And there was 1 year that I was literally here every single day for an entire calendar year.
Oh my gosh.
There was always a day where I was here working. And I don't ever remember in ministry ever hearing the words mental health when it came to, all of those working in ministry. I mean, we talk about it with membership, and we talk about it on visits and those kind of things, but we would never talk about it in terms of our own ministry and our own faith journey. So the fact that that's even being discussed, that boards and members are having the conversation with their leadership and saying, what do you need? What are the ways that we can support you? Because we burn out. It's just the case, There's less and less people stepping into ministry. There's more and more people stepping out of ministry because it is taxing. So what are the things that you're doing for your spirit to kind of prevent yourself from being in that place?
It's a great question. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, I think May is, and we just had Mental Health Sunday, I think this last Sunday, and even at our own church over Lent leading up to Easter, we spent an entire series focusing on the intersection of faith and mental health. And it was amazing what came out of that, just a really courageous conversation that a lot of churches maybe aren't necessarily having as directly as they should around our own mental well-being and health, especially, again, growing out of the pandemic. All those underlying mental health issues were exacerbated in so many ways. So for me, it's really important to stay grounded in nature, and being outside is a big thing for me. I'm a trout fisherman. I'm a fisherman at heart. I love being outdoors. I love spending time with my kids and my wife, just unstructured family time. If I've got a day off, I find like I don't pack a lot in. Sometimes it's nice just to be around the house without having to run any errands anywhere. And the nice thing about ministry too is that there's a lot of opportunities for life here at church to integrate with life with family. And so Just the other day, some church members had some of the kids that they were mentoring, some fifth graders that they're mentoring, over to a local pond to do some fishing. And the invitation was, hey, if you want to come, great, bring your son. And so he and I got to hang out and get to know some more people from church and hang out with some kids from church, but also get to spend time together for a couple of hours. Beautiful day. So there's lots of organic ways to blur those boundaries sometimes that are really fun.
That's one of the coolest things about church that I've always found is there was always this encouragement of like, yeah, you may be working or whatever the capacity is, but bring your family, bring your kids,
Yeah.
We can tolerate, not even tolerate, but almost even encourage the idea of, your kids being around and worship and laugh at those moments where the kids come up on the chancel and those kind of things, instead of it being very much like, sit down, don't move, make a noise. My son, he loves to heckle. It's one of the things that I've had to learn as a pastor and a preacher. Being able to tune his voice out. Because, the dad ears, if I'm preaching and he says something, I'm hyper attuned to it. He loves to comment and offer his 2 cents, and I've just learned how to incorporate those things. And the church is very, very open and supportive of kids being in worship. And the idea that you can, if I'm in the office, bring them along and all those kind of things. And I love that. It feels like we're supporting family.
It does. So as much as it's important to sometimes maintain those boundaries for mental health, spiritual health, it can be a lot of fun, and it can be really supportive to blend them sometimes in a ministry setting where it's not just work, it's relationship, it's family, it's community. And my kids and my spouse, my partner, are a part of this place. So that's really special.
Are there times that you've had to kind of put your foot down in terms of like Sabbath time? Because that's where the line really gets to be a little bit blurred because of the accessibility that we kind of expect. That we have this mentality sometimes of like, I'll rest when I've earned it, or I'll rest when I'm done. But that's not the model that God kind of gave us. So are there times that you've had to really be intentional about putting your foot down and saying, hey, I need this time with my family. I need to completely unplug from this place. And I'll address that when I get back. Or, we'll have to send somebody else for that thing.
I've felt really good so far here at Broadway. My coworkers on our team have always been really supportive of when they need time, they take that time, and the others of us can step in and field what needs to be done while they're gone, and vice versa. You take that for your family. It's our lead pastor recently resigned, was super attuned to that and encouraging of that, and I always really appreciated that about him.
Good.
And then, my wife's a teacher by trade, and so the academic calendar kind of dictates a lot of our times off. So we're coming into summer, and I know we're going to have some rhythm in there to retreat a little bit and be together. But spring break, Christmas break, those kind of natural times of the school year tend to be times when, also in youth ministry, where you might pull back a little bit because the kids are going to be on their vacations with their families. We can do the same. So that's been helpful to have those kind of structured rhythms to carve out a little more intentional Sabbath.
Yeah. I mean, I always used to say about youth ministry, like, there's this idea of being young, and when you're in it, really the energy kind of takes the place of, it covers a lot.
Yeah.
Just energy and proximity when you're young. It covers your lack of wisdom, your lack of life experience, right, in those places. And but as you get older, you can't so much rely on the energy. As you have other things happening and other responsibilities, you can't rely so much on the proximity. You really have to lean on the wisdom and life experiences. So what are the kind of ways that you're implementing that as you tackle being in the trenches with all these different age groups of people again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the ways is just to to draw in others to help you with the work. Others that can relate to the kids in different ways than you can. Others that might have different availability schedules than you have. It can't. I think there's a reckoning in a lot of youth ministry today that all the ministry happening by this one person or this one personality isn't just unhealthy for that individual because it puts so much on them, but it's not the best way to structure ministry. Equipping, empowering, raising up others, animating others to do some of the direct work with the kids in ways that you might not be able to or available to or have the energy to is awesome. And then also just finding ways for the kids to lend their gifts and their energy and their enthusiasm for the good of the community is good ministry. It's less about come and do my thing over here, and more about what are you passionate about and how can we leverage that? How can I help you bridge that gift to make our faith community better because of who you are? So that's all ways we can try to take some of the pressure off of ourselves and invite others in to share in this blessed work and to get the kids to do some of the outer work that's so important.
Yeah. Youth ministry's changed, even just in the past decade.
Yeah.
But I mean, even coming out of the pandemic, it's a little bit different. So
yeah.
It used to be about how can we have this wide variety of different accessibility points for ministry. And then it kind of shifted from that model of like, people used to do youth group on Sunday nights and those kind of things. And then it shifted a little bit to being during the week and less touch points. And now we kind of live in a world where kids are having games and stuff on Sundays.
Yeah.
Their schedules are so packed. Kids are hyper involved in everything.
Yeah.
And you see numbers of families involved in churches dip. And as a result, the number of kids involved in programs dip. So what does youth ministry look like now in terms of how do we reach kids?
We'll answer that question, write a good book about it, and sell it and make $1 million. I mean, you put your finger on one of the $1 million questions right now in ministry, reaching families first, parents first, and reaching kids too. In a world where they are so hyper scheduled and so hyper involved in a lot of really awesome things. We run the risk now in some programs of setting ourselves in competition. And so over these other things. And so kids and families got this list of priorities and obligations and commitments on any given day of the week. And we can run into the programmatic fallacy of saying, well, our youth program has to be at the top of that list, or at least in the top 3 to get them here, right? About 10% of families will just always put church in that upper tier. Church is super important. We're going to carve out space to do that. They're going to do that. But that may not necessarily be the case for other families. And so what ends up happening is we end up going the big, bright, and flashy route and the entertainment route and the super, uber, duper fun route so that kids will say, I want to do that instead of this. And you got to have some of that in a really good program. But if that's all it is, what we know from experience and studies is that kids eventually don't find that meaningful or resonant with them. Might be fun to do for a while, but that's not ultimately going to lead kids to Jesus. The other thing we do then is try to put guilt and obligation on parents and say, you need to get your kids to church. You're not making it a priority. And I couldn't be more anti that. Our parents have so much on their plate. You know it, I know it, because we wear that hat. There are so many things we want for our kids. There are so many things we want to do in our own lives for our families. And if a program starts to lean on guilt to get kids there or to get parents to get their kids there, that's a recipe for failure too. And so part of it is trying to be attentive to the needs of our families and the needs of our kids today and adapt what we do to try to meet them where they're at. That might mean we have to take a more decentralized approach to ministry and open up some flexibility for how kids connect and how families can show up. It might mean we've had some success even just this past year with shorter term obligations that they can plug into at times of the year where they might have more availability. You don't have to attend all the things all the time forever. But if you could just give me this chunk of time during this part of your year when basketball season's done or theater is through, I can do a lot of really good and meaningful work with your son, with your daughter for 4 weeks. And if they could do that a few times a year and maybe come to this thing over here and there, that'll make for a really positive experience for them, a meaningful experience for them. So kind of decentralizing and differentiating the ways in which families can plug in and get their kids some formative experiences that work in and through their schedules has been helpful. Stop asking families to come all the time to what we're doing and start going to where they're at. When you show up somewhere out there, or if you build a ministry strategy that gets church members to go out there and support kids, that's awesome.
I mean, that's the huge point of where I've always seen youth ministry thrive is this idea. The fallacy is this idea of you have kids that grow up and maybe they're in a church community and they're supposed to be invested in the church community. They're supposed to be the people that are doing all of the work, that are clearing their schedule to show up to this, to show up to this. And they're supposed to be meeting the church where it's at, not the church meeting them where they're at.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be the people that are making the relationship with the church, not the church making the relationship with the kids. And so we always prioritized touches. It was how do we split out amongst this group as many touches as we can, as many touch points during the course of the week, whether that's sending some messages, social media stuff, touching in with kids, whether that's going to a ball game, whether that's going to a recital, whatever those things are. How do we create a relationship first before we ask things of kids?
Yeah.
And through the relationship, now you're able to have a meaningful moment when you have a group that meets and you go through a prayer activity.
Yeah.
Because you're leaning on that relationship that grows and evolves. And that's the only way to get investment, is to say, hey, as a church and as a community, we're invested in you.
Yeah.
And it creates a reciprocal relationship.
It does. You hear this adage now, belonging before belief, right? Or belong, behave, believe, that the inroad to community in Christ happens first and foremost through a sense of belonging. And that always happens in relationship. And so creating those touch points, I think we do a really good job here at our church of there's really not too much a young person can't do at church. Like if you're not a youth group kid, but you're a music kid, or you're not a music kid, but you love tech, or if you're creative writing or artistic, or if you love the hands-on, like setup, tear down, service kind of stuff, there's all kinds of ways to build opportunities for kids to plug in here. And then we structure that in a way that helps facilitate belonging and draws them more deeply into the work that we're here to do. So, yeah.
It, one of the things that I always disliked about church is it was always kind of one image that was presented, and not this idea that it's multi-generational, multi-layered, that it's diverse across the board, because people's life experiences is diverse.
Yeah.
I had the benefit of coming into ministry in these things, of being an incredibly curious kid I probably read the Bible 3 times through before I ever even, started regularly going to a church. And we looked for a church home for a long time. And I didn't start coming here until my sophomore year of high school. I got baptized after going on a mission trip.
Oh, wow.
And, I got the youth minister as my baptism mentor.
Oh, wow.
So that I could quiz him about all of these things that I had questions and I needed clarification on.
Yeah.
And to have that back and forth. And I got to choose it. Nobody forced me to go to Sunday school every single Sunday. And I got to choose the relationship, and I got to see people invest in me and really see me before I chose, this is the place that I want to be, and these are the people that I want to do this thing with.
Yeah.
And understanding that faith is an exploration, even for an adult.
Yeah.
Right? It's an exploratory journey. And treating kids with that compassion that sometimes the change in the heart happens before the change in behavior happens.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of expect those things to happen at the same time. But there's people that have been here for 20 years that have been praising and praying and have a deep relationship with God that still haven't managed to change the behavior.
Yeah.
And so the expectation for a 14-year-old to have that change in heart and say, I believe, and then to just get in line and behave, well, it doesn't work that way. So what are the ways that you see that intersection of the larger church body and those multi-generations interfacing with the young people?
Yeah.
Is there a way that you see that plugging in?
Yeah. It's one of the few places where we're finding a lot of success in ministry right now. Our society has become so age segmented in so many ways. There's very few spaces anymore where people come together across intergenerational lines to relate, to do something together, to share in something together. And so trying to be intentionally intergenerational in some of the opportunities that we build up is really essential to this. It's meaningful to the kids when they get to meet and get to know other adults in this faith community. It's also really meaningful to the adults when they get to form some of that relationship with these kids who they don't always get to see on a regular basis. So just this week, in a few days, we're having our end of year lock-in. But we're going to precede that with a bingo night, about an hour.
Awesome.
We've done this a few times, and it's always been a lot of fun. Everybody loves bingo, no matter what your age. We've got prizes. Sometimes the seniors take it to the kids, and sometimes the kids just mop the floor with the seniors in terms of who wins the most that night. But we're trying to take an event that we know will draw a lot of kids because they all love a night in the church, and weave that with an opportunity to relate a little bit to our adults. So we'll have dinner, we'll come together and play about an hour's worth of bingo. Bingo will be the thing that kind of anchors us, but I've also got some ways to get them talking with each other. And that's really fun when we do service projects. We started a Sunday night program here this past year and invited people, different adult Sunday school groups, people from the community to provide a meal for the kids and then sit and eat with us. We just had our youth Sunday maybe 3 weeks ago now, where the kids carry worship, and it's always so meaningful for our older generation here at Broadway to see our kids out in force, to see them thriving, to hear their gifts in the context of worship. These are the kinds of things that help build rapport and relationship and meaning that is important for kids in a program, but also really important for the wider community.
Yeah. I think it's awesome, and I think it's something Broadway's definitely prided themselves on for. I remember getting to participate in things that I had no business participating in. But it creates that relationship that sees that we have more in common than we have different. And we kind of live in a world now. I mean, you have this passion in social justice and these things. We live in a world where young people are hypersensitive to those things. They're hypersensitive to the world that they want to live in, and the world that they're trying to make. And we have older generations that have different life experience, and they see the world a little bit differently, and there can be conflict. I mean, this is a very progressive congregation, but with any type of gap like that, there's going to be conflict that butts heads, and you kind of get to serve as this intermediary and an advocate for the young people. But there's a famous hymnist, Brian Wren. I don't know if you heard that name, but he wrote this book called Praying Twice about hymns, and he talks about the idea that the expectation that an older generation would have the same life experience as their grandchildren and as their children is a fallacy. It's not realistic. They have different life experiences, and they walk to a beat of a different drum, which means they hear things differently, they see things differently, and they feel things differently. And the idea that we would have a younger generation cave to the life experience of an older generation, as opposed to an older generation coming to meet a younger generation where they're at. Ultimately, as society progresses, we have to evolve, and we have to change, and we have to walk to a beat of a different drum. So what are the ways that you have a passion to make that happen, that evolution, that change, that sensitivity towards this growth? Is there a way that you're able to plug in there?
Oh, that's another $1 million question, right? Yeah, we had some fun with that on another intergenerational game night last year, I think it was. We did a trivia night, categories that lent themselves to phrases from the 1920s and slang phrases from the 1920s and 30s versus slang phrases from today, or technology was one of them. Technology that our older generation would have been familiar with versus tech that our kids are more familiar with today. So there's kind of playful ways you can bring them together. I think the beautiful thing about intergenerational community is that we're all co-creating this thing together. Tradition is a living and breathing thing that is grounded in what always has been, but finds new ways to express itself in what is and what's to come. If tradition just stays grounded in what it always has been, it'll die because it's not evolving and breathing and growing and living forward. But if it forgets about all of that and it just rushes onward, it's going to make the same mistakes of the past. It's going to lose the wisdom of the past. It's going to lose the relational groundedness and the history of the past. And all of that shared experience that the generations that came prior have. And so kind of maintaining that ebb and flow is really critical. It happens in relationship when we help build relationship through some of these ministry strategies I talked about. We've tried to do a better job with our young people of instilling a sense of history and identity in them with their congregation and with this larger denomination that we're a part of. And so one of my goals for the upcoming year is to create some opportunities from some of the people at Broadway who were here at the beginning or here near the beginning to come in and tell their story a little bit about how they came up in this church and what it's meant to them, and use that to shape a sense of corporate identity in our kids. That your church is more than just this physical brick and mortar place that you come. You're part of this living, breathing community that came before you and that you're carrying forward into the future. Just cultivating that mindset and that connection in them, I think, is really important.
I love that, the idea of identity. Because, churches, where we really fail sometimes is start to put a whole bunch of energy into what we do. It's about what we do, but really it's about who we are, right? And the what we do changes over time. If you look back to, it's one of the interesting things about disciples is progressive in theology, but really traditional in terms of some practice. And so it's interesting, this idea that people are hyper invested in things like at my church. I think about There was an original sanctuary, and then they built an addition and turned the building. And there are people that are very intentional about, I need to sit in the back of the room because I need to sit in the original sanctuary.
Oh, wow.
And that's a beautiful tradition, and we honor that piece. But if the whole building were to be gone, and we were to build a new church building and be in a different place, do we suddenly not become who we are anymore because you're not able to sit in this geography anymore? And when you become hyper invested in what we do, and we do things this way, then you've got blinders on for the Spirit and the way that God is leading you and calling you. Because ultimately, especially if you think about worship, you think about all these things, it's about our relationship with God, but it's not about us. You know, we don't go into worship to praise ourselves. We go into worship to praise God.
Yeah.
And that can look different at any given moment.
Yeah.
I think we have a younger generation that's starting to get really dialed in to this idea and chasing authenticity instead of chasing format or chasing structure or even chasing tradition in some sense. They're chasing an experience. What are the ways that that looks in the future for the church? Because the church is evolving. Some would say it's dying a slow death, but others would say there's an emergence of that authenticity. So what does that look like going forward?
Yeah, I think our young people are calling us to a more authentic way of being church. They gravitate towards that relationship, right? That's the foot in the door, and that's what grounds all of us, really. And I think they want to see a community that's honest with itself, that's not afraid to speak about its flaws, that's not afraid to show some of its scars, to admit its imperfections. There's an attraction to that way of being church. And I think that's a real gift. I think all of us at this moment right now, when we're kind of in, as I called it just this past week, in a liminal space, a space that's neither quite here nor quite there. We're kind of living in this spiritual hallway where we can look back and kind of see where we've been, but we're also moving to something up here, and we're not quite there yet, right? Yeah. Learning to live in this space that's vulnerable and a little raw and a little scary and a little uncomfortable, but also a space that's deeply graced, where the Holy Spirit finds us in our most teachable, right, and moldable, because things are taking shape. Young people are really good at helping shape things and bring new shape and new ideas to things. I think the more we can listen to them and involve them in this moment of shaping, the better it's going to be for them, the better it's going to be for the church at large. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, I don't even know if there is an answer to the question.
No.
But I think, that's the whole pursuit of this podcast. I think that's the whole pursuit of where my heart is in ministry, and I know where your heart is in ministry. Is really bridging that gap and hyper connectivity.
Yeah.
Right? It's relational and getting back to that place of really seeing each other.
Yeah.
Not seeing the image of you or the perception of you or the beliefs or the ideas that you carry, but just seeing you as a human being.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I so appreciate your spirit. I so appreciate the ministry that you do, your ability to communicate, just the humble way that you walk through this.
Thanks,
because
Michael.
It sets the model for all of those people that come into contact with you, for all those people that you're charged with leading and teaching.
Yeah.
And it gives me hope.
Thank you. Yeah, we are in this moment together, right? Yeah. And there is an emergence happening. That's part of the ebb and flow of our faith. Is there's always going to be periods of some contraction and then some new birth, or some pain and then some resurrection. And the more I think we can enter into that humbly and with a spirit of community together, across ages, across priorities, we'll come out of it the other side a little bit closer to what Jesus wants us to look like.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I know your flock is going to be okay because, you certainly inspired me today, and you continue to do so.
Glad to have you as a partner in all this and a friend. Michael, thank you. This was fun. Thanks for your conversation.
Of course. And to all of you, thanks for tuning in. We can be a part of the change that we want to see in the world. And all it takes is a little bit of energy, a little bit of heart, a little bit of spirit, and we can create the world that God wants us to live in. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up.